The warning came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Captain James Miller sat in the dimly lit control room of Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station, staring at the unusual readings on his screen. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten as he studied the strange energy patterns coming from the edge of the solar system. "Sir, the readings are getting stronger," said Robert, the young technician manning the sensor array. His fingers moved quickly across the holographic display, adjusting the sensitivity of their long-range scanners. Miller nodded slowly, his weathered face showing the careful consideration that had earned him both respect and ridicule throughout his career. "Run the full spectrum analysis again. And this time, activate all backup sensors." "But sir," Robert hesitated, "that will drain our power reserves by 15%. The Galactic Council representatives won't be happy about using so many resources for what might be nothing." "Better to waste some power than miss something important," Miller replied, his voice firm but gentle. It was the same caution that had made some alien species call humans the cowards of the galaxy. But 20 years in space had taught Miller that space held more dangers than anyone could imagine. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Ambassador Green from the Galactic Council walked in, followed by 3 alien representatives. The aliens were all tall, proud warriors from different species who had never quite understood humanity's careful approach to space exploration. "Captain Miller," the ambassador's voice carried a hint of annoyance, "we've received complaints about your station's power usage. Again." Miller turned his chair slowly, facing the group. "Ambassador, we've detected unusual energy patterns near the Kuiper Belt. I've ordered full scanning protocols." One of the aliens, a tall being with metallic skin, let out a sound like grinding gears, their version of laughter. "Always so careful, you humans. In my species, we would already have sent ships to investigate. And that's exactly why we're still here, while 2 of your deep space stations went dark last year," Miller replied calmly. He turned back to his screen, pointing at the strange wavelengths. "Look at these patterns. They're not natural." The ambassador leaned closer, her face reflecting the blue light of the display. "They look like standard space phenomena to me. Similar readings appear all the time in the Andromeda sector." "Not like these," Miller insisted. "These are organized. There's a pattern here that repeats every 67 seconds. Nature doesn't work that way." Robert's console suddenly lit up with new data. "Captain, the energy signatures are moving. They're changing direction against the solar wind." The alien representatives crowded around the display, their previous mockery forgotten for a moment. Miller watched the patterns shift and move, his mind already running through emergency protocols. "I'm implementing full quarantine procedures," he announced, pressing his hand against the security scanner. Red lights began flashing silently throughout the station. "This is absurd," the metallic alien protested. "You'll shut down half the station's functions for what could be simple space dust." Miller stood up, his voice taking on an edge of steel that surprised even the ambassador. 23 years ago, humanity was almost wiped out because we rushed into first contact without proper precautions. We survived because one cowardly captain insisted on following quarantine protocols. I won't risk the lives of my crew or this station because you think we're being too careful." The aliens fell silent, but their disapproval radiated through the room. Miller didn't care. He had seen too many brave species rush into danger, had watched too many proud warriors ignore warning signs that seemed obvious in hindsight. As the quarantine procedures kicked in and emergency teams took their positions, Miller looked out the observation window at the vast emptiness of space. Somewhere out there, something was moving through their solar system. Something that didn't follow the normal rules of space and energy. And thanks to human caution, they would be ready for it, whatever it was. 3 days after the strange energy readings appeared, the first alien research vessel exploded. There was no warning, no distress signal, just a bright flash at the edge of the solar system that lit up every sensor in the sector. Captain Miller watched the replay for the 10th time, his face grim. Next to him, Robert worked frantically at his console, analyzing the data from the explosion. "It was the bold victory," Miller said quietly. "They ignored our warnings and went to collect samples." The metallic alien who had mocked them days earlier stood silently in the corner of the control room. His shining surface had dulled, a sign of mourning among his people. The bold victory had been crewed by his species. "The quantum readings are off the charts," Robert reported, looking up from his screen. "Whatever these things are, they're alive. The energy patterns match biological signatures, just smaller than anything we've ever seen before." Through the station's massive windows, more research ships could be seen arriving. The destruction of the bold victory hadn't scared them away. It had only made them more curious. Warriors and scientists from a dozen alien races, all eager to study this new form of life. "They're too small to see," Miller explained to Ambassador Green, who had become much more attentive since the explosion. "But they're everywhere out there, moving through space like fish through water." "Then how do we study them?" she asked. "We can't just ignore them. We observe, we learn, from a safe distance." Miller pressed a button, bringing up a holographic display of the microscopic beings. "Look how they move. They're not random. They're looking for something." Another flash lit up the void. Another research ship, gone in an instant. This one had tried to capture the quantum beings in an energy field. "All ships, pull back immediately," Miller broadcast on all frequencies. "These beings react violently to direct interference. Maintain safe distance and observe only." Most of the alien ships ignored the warning. Their crews were too proud, too brave to listen to a cautious human. One by one, ships winked out of existence as they got too close to the quantum swarm. Hours passed. Miller ordered his station to maintain their distance, focusing all their sensors on understanding these strange new life forms. Robert discovered they fed on energy. Any kind of energy. That's why the ships exploded. Their power cores were like bright beacons, drawing the hungry swarm. "Look at this," Robert called out suddenly. The main screen showed new data, patterns in the swarm's movement that no one had noticed before. "They're not just feeding. They're running from something." Miller leaned forward, studying the patterns. The quantum beings were indeed moving like frightened animals, darting forward then looking back, always in the same direction. "We need to warn the Council," he said, turning to Ambassador Green. "Something bigger is coming. Something that scares these creatures." "The Council won't listen," she replied, shaking her head. "They're already angry about losing so many ships. They're preparing a military response." As if to prove her point, a massive warship appeared at the edge of their sensor range. It belonged to a warrior race known for their fearless battles. Its weapons could destroy a planet. "They're going to try to destroy the swarm," Robert said, his voice shaking. Miller grabbed the communications console. "Warship Eternal Glory, do not engage. Your weapons will only." The warning came too late. The warship fired its main cannon, a beam of pure energy meant to split planets in half. For a moment, everything went white. When the light faded, the warship was gone. But the quantum swarm had grown larger, stronger, fed by the massive energy blast meant to destroy them. "Send all our data to Earth," Miller ordered quietly. "Every reading, every observation. Because whatever these beings are running from, it's coming for us next. And we need to be ready." In the darkness of space, the swarm continued to grow, feeding on the remains of the proud ships that had tried to fight them. Only the human station remained untouched, watching, learning, and preparing for what was to come. The stars were going dark. Captain Miller stood before the emergency meeting of the Galactic Council, showing images of darkened solar systems on the massive screen behind him. In just 2 weeks, the quantum beings had spread to 12 star systems, draining the energy from stars like hungry insects devouring leaves. "The beings are multiplying," Miller explained, his voice steady despite the panic in the room. Each star they feed on gives them enough energy to split into thousands more. The council chamber, usually full of proud arguments and bold speeches, was quiet now. Representatives from 50 alien species watched as their mighty civilizations began to crumble. Without starlight, their planets would freeze. Without energy, their ships couldn't fly. "We must fight," shouted a warrior from a race of battle-hardened aliens. "We will gather our fleets and destroy these creatures." Miller shook his head. "You saw what happened to the eternal glory. Energy weapons only make them stronger. Physical weapons pass right through them. They're too small to fight." "Then what do you suggest?" asked the council leader, her many eyes blinking rapidly in frustration. "That we run away like cowards." Robert, who had come with Miller to present their findings, stepped forward. "We've been studying their movements. They're not random. They're following a pattern that—" A loud alarm cut through the room. On the main screen, another star flickered and died, its light eaten by the endless swarm of quantum beings. This one had been home to millions. "The proud Zenith Empire is sending their fleet to attack the swarm," reported an aide, rushing into the chamber. "They say they would rather die fighting than hiding like humans." Everyone watched the screens as the mighty Zenith fleet, over 1,000 ships strong, approached the swarm. Their weapons lit up space like new stars. 3 minutes later, every ship was gone. The swarm had grown even larger. "Listen to me," Miller said, his voice cutting through the frightened whispers. "Fighting isn't always the answer. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step back and think." He pressed a button, showing new data on the screen. "We've been watching, learning. These beings, they're not just eating stars randomly. They're choosing specific paths, almost like they're trying to build something." "A weapon?" asked one of the council members. "No," Robert replied. "We think it's a wall. They're creating a barrier of dark space, using the energy they steal from stars. But why build a wall unless they're trying to stop something from following them?" Miller finished. The council chamber erupted in frightened conversations. The idea that something could be scary enough to make these star-eating creatures run was terrifying. "We've detected a disturbance," Miller continued, showing more readings. "Something massive, moving through space behind the quantum beings. Whatever it is, it's consuming everything in its path, not just energy, but matter itself. Even space and time are warped around it." "Then we are doomed," the council leader said quietly. "If we cannot fight the smaller beings, how can we fight something even worse?" Miller smiled for the first time since the crisis began. "Who said anything about fighting? Humans have survived this long because we know when to fight and when to think. And I have a plan." He brought up a new image, a complex pattern of energy fields and gravity wells. "We don't need to destroy these quantum beings. We need to understand them, help them. Because whatever they're running from, they've been fighting it longer than we have." The council chamber was silent again, but this time it was different. For the first time, these proud alien races were starting to understand that courage didn't always mean rushing into battle. "It won't be easy," Miller admitted. "We'll need resources, cooperation from every species, and we'll need to be patient, careful, some might even say cowardly." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of species that had mocked humans for generations. "But if being cowardly means saving our galaxy, then maybe it's time we all learn to be a little more human." Outside the council chamber, another star went dark. But this time, there was hope. Because sometimes the biggest victories don't come from the strongest warriors, but from those wise enough to be careful. The observation room of Earth's deep space station was crowded with the strangest collection of beings ever assembled. Aliens from 20 different species stood shoulder to tentacle, watching as Miller explained his plan. "The quantum beings aren't our enemy," Miller said, pointing to a hologram showing their movement patterns. "They're refugees, just like we're about to become if we don't help them." Robert moved through the crowd, handing out data tablets. "We've analyzed 6 months of their behavior now. They don't attack unless threatened. They don't consume energy unless they need it. And most importantly, he pressed a button, and the hologram changed. They worked together. The image showed thousands of quantum beings moving in perfect harmony, creating complex patterns in space. It was like watching a dance made of starlight. They're building something, Miller continued. Not just a wall, but a path. They're trying to guide something around our galaxy instead of through it. An alien scientist raised one of their four hands. But they're destroying our stars in the process. How is this helping? Because they don't know any better, Miller replied. They're scared, running on instinct. But what if we could help them? Show them better ways to get the energy they need. He brought up a new image, a massive network of energy collectors positioned around uninhabited stars. We can give them what they want, guide them where we need them to go. Not with weapons, but with understanding. A shepherd doesn't fight his flock, Robert added. He guides them. Some of the alien warriors grumbled at this approach. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't brave. But after watching their mightiest weapons fail, they were ready to listen. Miller switched to another display, showing the thing that was chasing the quantum beings. It looked like a hole in space itself, growing larger as it consumed everything in its path. We've named it the Void, he explained. It's like a living black hole, but worse. It doesn't just eat matter and energy. It erases things from existence itself. The quantum beings have been fighting it for longer than our species has existed. And now you want us to help these creatures? Asked one of the alien commanders. The same ones that destroyed our ships. Those ships attacked them first, Miller reminded everyone. When humans encounter a bear in the forest, we don't immediately try to fight it. We back away slowly. We respect it. We try to understand what it wants and why it's there. He pressed another button, and the hologram showed his complete plan. A network of energy stations, carefully positioned to create safe paths through space. Places where the quantum beings could feed without destroying inhabited systems. A way to work with them instead of against them. It will take all of us working together, Miller said. We'll need technology from every species, knowledge from every civilization. But most importantly, we'll need patience. The room was quiet as the aliens studied the plan. It wasn't what they were used to. Their stories celebrated warriors who fought against impossible odds, not cautious planners who found peaceful solutions. My people have a saying. One of the older aliens finally spoke up. The strongest tree is not the one that never bends, but the one that knows when to bend. One by one, the aliens began to nod. They had tried fighting. They had tried being brave. Maybe it was time to try being wise instead. The Void will be here in less than a year, Robert reported, checking his instruments. If we start now, we might just have enough time to prepare. Miller looked around the room, seeing determination replace fear in alien eyes, tentacles, and sensor clusters. Then let's get to work. The quantum beings aren't our enemy. They're our advance warning system. And maybe, just maybe, they're also our best chance at survival. Outside the station, the quantum beings continued their complex dance through space, building their wall of darkness. But now, for the first time, they weren't alone. Now they had allies who understood what it meant to be careful in a dangerous universe. Because sometimes the best way to face a threat isn't to fight it. It's to find a better way around it. Time was running out. On the main construction platform floating in deep space, Miller watched as thousands of ships worked together, building the largest structure ever created. The Energy Shepherd Network, as they called it, stretched across 3 solar systems already. Ships from every alien race moved like busy insects, placing massive energy collectors in precise patterns. Another group of quantum beings approaching from Sector 7. Robert reported from his new command center. The young technician now coordinated efforts across 50 different species, each bringing their own unique technologies to the project. Miller nodded, watching the swarm approach on his screens. Activate the test sequence. Let's see if they follow the path. Green energy lines lit up in space, creating a corridor of carefully controlled power sources. Everyone held their breath as the quantum beings approached. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the swarm began to turn, following the energy trail like fish following a current. They moved exactly where the humans had predicted they would. "It's working," shouted one of the alien engineers, their mechanical translator barely able to contain their excitement. "They're actually following the guide paths." Miller allowed himself a small smile. After 3 months of failures and adjustments, they had finally found the right energy frequency to guide the quantum beings. Now they just had to scale it up, about 1,000,000 times larger. "Status report." He called out to the various team leaders. The reports came in from across space. The proud warrior races had turned their warships into construction vessels, using their powerful engines to move massive energy collectors into position. Scientific species provided the technology to control and direct energy flows. Even the most ancient civilizations shared their knowledge of space and time. "We're at 40% completion," Robert summarized. "But the void, it's getting closer. The quantum beings are becoming more agitated." Miller checked the long-range sensors. The massive darkness that was consuming space itself had grown even larger. Where once it had been the size of a solar system, it now spanned an entire sector. Stars disappeared into it like drops of water into an endless ocean. "We need more time," one of the alien commanders said, their usual confidence replaced by worry. "The network isn't ready." "Then we work faster," Miller replied. "Every ship, every worker, every resource we have goes into this project. We can't fight the void, but we can redirect it. Just like we're redirecting the quantum beings." Days passed in a blur of constant work. The construction teams worked in shifts, racing against time itself. Species that had been enemies for generations now worked side by side, understanding that their only hope was to work together. Finally, after another month of non-stop effort, Robert called everyone to the command center. "The network is ready," he announced, showing the completed structure on the main screen. It was beautiful in its own way, a vast web of energy collectors and guide paths stretching across space. "And not a moment too soon," Miller added, pointing to another display. The void was now visible to the naked eye, a massive darkness approaching their galaxy. "Begin primary sequence." Across the vast network, energy collectors powered up one by one. Guide paths lit up in sequence, creating a massive trail through space. The quantum beings, which had been gathering in greater numbers, began to move along the paths. "They're doing it," Robert whispered. "They're actually following the network." Miller watched as trillions of quantum beings flowed through their carefully designed paths, their movement creating a massive energy barrier. But instead of blocking the void, this barrier was designed to guide it, to show it a path around inhabited space rather than through it. "Now we wait," Miller said, "and we hope that being careful, being cautious, being human, was the right choice." The gathered aliens watched in silence as their greatest engineering project in history lit up the darkness of space. There were no weapons, no battles, no glorious last stands, just careful planning, patient work, and the hope that sometimes the best way to face a threat was to guide it rather than fight it. In the end, maybe that was the bravest choice of all. The void arrived at sunset. From the observation deck of the command station, Miller watched as darkness, deeper than space itself, approached their network. Stars disappeared one by one as it moved closer, like candles being blown out by an endless wind. "All stations report ready," Robert called out, his voice steady despite the fear everyone felt. "The quantum beings are in position." The command center was packed with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. No one spoke. No one moved. They all watched as the greatest threat any of them had ever faced came to test their plan. "Look at the quantum beings," one of the alien scientists whispered. The microscopic creatures had formed themselves into massive shapes, creating patterns that pulsed with strange light. It was as if they were trying to communicate. They're not just running, Miller realized, studying the patterns. They're trying to tell us something about the void. Robert rapidly adjusted the station's sensors, focusing on the quantum being's movements. The patterns, they're similar to ancient space maps, but different, like they're showing us something about space itself. The void grew closer. At its edges, reality itself seemed to bend and twist. It wasn't just darkness, it was the absence of everything. Not just light and matter, but space and time themselves simply stopped existing where the void touched. The quantum beings, the alien scientists said suddenly, they're not creating a wall. They're trying to repair something. Look. On the screens, they could see how the quantum beings' energy patterns weren't just random barriers. They were weaving something into the fabric of space itself, like trying to patch a torn piece of cloth. The void isn't just eating things, Miller said, understanding finally dawning. It's a tear in reality. And the quantum beings, they'd been trying to fix it this whole time. Around them, the massive energy shepherd network hummed with power. But now, with this new understanding, Miller saw it differently. They hadn't just built a path to guide the void. They'd built a framework that could help the quantum beings repair the damage. Adjust all energy frequencies, he ordered. Don't try to push the void away. Help the quantum beings strengthen the space around it. Contain it. The alien technicians moved quickly, recalibrating the entire network. Energy beams that had been set to deflect now focused on reinforcing the quantum beings' efforts. The void reached the edge of their network. Everyone held their breath. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, the darkness began to slow. Where the quantum beings worked, supported by the energy from the shepherd network, space itself seemed to become stronger. The tear in reality couldn't spread any further. It's working, Robert said in amazement. They're actually containing it. But the victory was far from certain. The strain on the network was enormous. Energy collectors sparked and failed under the pressure. The quantum beings themselves seemed to flicker as they worked to hold back the nothingness. "We need more power," one of the alien commanders shouted. "The network can't handle this much strain." Miller looked around the command center, at all the species that had once mocked humans for being too careful, too cautious. "Then we'll give them more power. Every ship, every station, every generator we have, link them to the network." Now, across space, thousands of ships moved into position, adding their power to the network. Space stations diverted every spare bit of energy they had. Even the quantum beings seemed to work harder, their patterns becoming more complex, more determined. Slowly, impossibly, the void began to shrink. "The quantum beings," Robert reported, checking his readings. "They're not just containing it anymore. They're healing the tear in space itself. They're closing it." Miller watched as the darkness that had terrorized the galaxy began to fade, not through weapons or warfare, but through understanding and cooperation, through being careful enough to see what was really happening and brave enough to try something different. "Maybe," he said quietly, "this is what courage really looks like." Around him, aliens who had once seen humans as cowards nodded in agreement, because sometimes the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemy. It's finding a way to fix what was broken in the first place. 1 month after the void was sealed, the Galactic Council held its largest gathering in history. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from every known species, all gathered to mark a moment that would change their understanding forever. Miller stood on the speaker's platform, looking out at the assembled beings. Next to him, Robert managed the displays showing their victory over the void. But more importantly, the screens showed what they had learned. "The quantum beings are staying," Miller announced to the gathered crowd. "Not as refugees or threats, but as allies. They've chosen to become guardians, watching for any new tiers in space that might appear." The hall erupted in cheers, 1,000 different species celebrating in their own unique ways. Even the proudest warrior races had learned to respect these tiny creatures they had once tried to destroy. "But they're not the only ones who will stand guard," Miller continued. the Energy Shepherd network will remain. Improved. Expanded. A testament to what we can achieve when we stop fighting and start understanding. On the main screen, images showed the network being rebuilt. Stronger this time. Permanent. Ships from every species worked together, turning the emergency measure into a lasting monument to cooperation. For generations, Miller said, his voice carrying across the silent hall, humans were mocked for being too careful, too cautious, too cowardly. He paused, looking at faces that had once sneered at human caution. But what you saw as cowardice was something else, something that saved us all. Robert brought up new images, countless stars that would have been lost if they had tried to fight the void. Billions of lives that would have ended if they had chosen battle over understanding. Wisdom. An elder alien spoke from the crowd. What we saw as cowardice was wisdom. The wisdom to stop and think before acting. The wisdom to understand before fighting. Miller nodded. Humans learned caution because our world taught it to us. Every step of our evolution was shaped by the need to stop, think, and understand before acting. And now that wisdom belongs to all of us. The council leader rose from her seat, her many eyes glowing with respect. The Galactic Council has made a decision, she announced. From this day forward, every major expedition, every first contact, every crisis response will include human advisors, not for their technology or their strength, but for their caution, their wisdom. More cheers filled the hall. Species that had once competed now stood together, understanding that their differences made them stronger. And there's more, Miller said, once the noise had settled. The quantum beings have shared something with us, a warning, but also a gift. The final images appeared on the screen. Complex patterns that the quantum beings had shown them. Maps of space and time, showing other tiers forming, other voids growing in distant parts of the universe. We're not done, Miller explained. There are more rifts out there, more tiers in the fabric of space. But this time, we're ready. Not with weapons or wars, but with understanding and cooperation. Robert stepped forward, showing the new ships already under construction. Ships designed not for battle, but for repair, for healing the very fabric of space itself. The quantum beings will guide us, Miller said, and we will guide each other. Because that's what we learned here. That true courage isn't about being the strongest or the fiercest. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is be careful enough to find a better way. As the hall filled with approving voices, Miller looked out at the gathered species, warriors who had learned to think before fighting, scientists who had learned to understand before experimenting, leaders who had learned that caution wasn't weakness, it was strength. And somewhere out in space, trillions of quantum beings danced among the stars, no longer running, no longer afraid. They had found what they were looking for all along. Allies who understood that the greatest victories don't come from fighting. They come from being wise enough to be careful, brave enough to be cautious, and strong enough to find a better way. The end.